Well, hello, my patients. Tonight, it's a great night as I have located new writers to read from based on these stories. I think I will need to bring them back to my asylum for more. Tonight, you will hear from many authors, several whom I've had my eyes on for quite a while, and a couple new ones. Clearly, they are just deviant enough to join our little family. Now, I will have to plan for ways to bring them to our wondrous playpen. I can be sure you will shudder. That sudden chill running down your back? Well, it's just my words coursing through your veins. Well, technically it's those writers' words. But as I was saying, the darkness in your room, it's just a bit darker than usual, don't you think? No, don't look. It will know. What is it? Well, just listen for a while. It'll come to you, I'm sure. Well now, I am your host, Beyond 5150. Yes, and as I'm sure you are aware, this is my asylum. You may have been brought here against your will, or you may have entered willingly. But now, you cannot leave, for I am the master of misery, your sovereign of the spine-tingling, your purveyor of the petrifying. And here, I am your god of all things horrifying. You will likely hear things you wish were never spoken, things you have never heard. Try as you might, you won't find your happy place. Now it's time to release the horror I have gathered for you tonight. Sit back, relax, and wait for the power of these horrors to twist you into my subservience. Tonight, I would like to focus on one of my many patients, but this one in particular has an interesting way with words. His name is P.A. Nightmares. Now, you can locate his writings in other playlists. You can also find them on Twitter. I have put them down in the link below. So if you are looking for something interesting, please take a look. You can find it there. But for now, I have at least 2 stories from this wondrous writer. The first is titled, Do Not Enter Here. And again, this author, well, my plaything, is P.A. Nightmares. A loud noise startled me awake despite being in a deep slumber. It took no time for me to realize that I was receiving a video call. I jumped out of bed and scurried across the room to answer it. The voice on the other end was one that I recognized. Hello, Commander. I need to speak with you about an urgent mission concerning a group of miners we lost contact with on Mars. Yes, sir. I'll be down in the briefing room in 5 minutes, I said. I quickly hurried about my small space, throwing on my clothes, before rushing out of my quarters into the briefing room with HQ. I saw my team had already arrived upon entering the room. I greeted them with a quick nod and asked if they had any idea why we'd been dragged out of bed at this ungodly hour. You and your team have been brought here to discuss your next mission. You will be charged with leading a mission to the surface of Mars. Your goal is to find and retrieve the lost miners. We have been out of communication with them for over 48 hours, so we are sending your team due to the fact you've had a lot of success with these kinds of missions in the past. Good luck, Commander. Leaving HQ with an uneasy feeling, I went back to my quarters and reviewed all that information that I was given, along with the materials of the last recordings from the lost mining crew. I listened intently as the static of the transmission began to play. No! 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 We should not be here. Our mining has disturbed something that's lying dormant. It's now awake. You gotta heed my warning. If you receive this transmission, abandon everything here. Save yourselves. When the miners warned, and then the transmission ended in a deafening roar, and the miners screaming. The loud roar I heard at the end of the transmission was concerning, so I went to work trying to determine where it come from. I put it in an analyzer, but it didn't come up with any known matches. It sounded like it had to come from something living, a living creature of some sort. However, at the same time, it could be something altogether different. I was lost deep within my thoughts, and I hadn't even realized we had landed. That was until one of my other crew members shook me. Sir, we've arrived. We're preparing for departure. I suggest getting your suit on, meeting us in the loading bay. The crew member had mentioned. Getting my suit on and filling my pack with all the necessary items I might need to find and retrieve the lost miner. A thought came unbidden at the same time. It was a highly likely possibility. If there's anything to find and retrieve, that is. The fear in his voice and the noise at the end of the recording gave me cause for great concern. Not right here on Mars. I would be lying if I said I was not one jump scare away from pissing my pants. I made my way to the loading bay and prepared myself for whatever it is we were about to stumble into. I pressed the button, watching as the ramp began the slow descent onto the red planet. I stepped out of the ship and pulled out the receiver to get the last known location of the miners, and the result wasn't too bad. The destination was just over 2 hours away from our landing zone on foot. We went and retrieved the rovers to reduce the amount of time it would take to get to our destination. We pulled the rovers out of the loading bay, and now the trip would only take about 30 minutes. The drive along the planet's surface was boring. Now, here we are, finding ourselves at the mouth of a cave. The atmosphere drastically changed upon entering the cave. I had a very, very bad feeling, and it was validated shortly after getting further inside. We rounded a corner and came face to face with a fresh corpse. Moved over to it and analyzed the ground around him. He had written his last words in the dirt. He who enters here abandoned all hope. I didn't understand why he would choose these as his last words. I removed my scanner from his pack to recover his identity. He appeared to be one of the miners that we were searching for. But I had no clue what happened to him. It looked like some kind of animal or a machine chewed him up and spat him out. The floor started to vibrate, almost as if I was on cue, and an all too familiar sound was heard echoing deep inside the cave. Get to the exit! Now! We can't get caught in here when the cave comes crashing down! I yelled over the noise to my team. Turning around, we rushed to the entrance of the cave. However, there was a wall where the entrance once was. What do we do now? Frank yelled. Now there's not much else we can do other than bend over and kiss our asses goodbye, Frank. At that moment, the floor cracked. Massive hole formed, swallowing everyone up like the maw of a gigantic beast, dropping us into a massive abyss. No one seemed to be injured from the impact. I was able to retrieve my flashlight after regaining my bearings. I slowly made my way around the dark room with nothing but my flashlight, and then I came upon a light switch. This room became flooded with a blinding white light when I flipped it on. In the middle of the room sat a table with yet another dead body on it. However, this one was strapped down, and it had clear indications of someone or something performing a surgical operation on them. I realized this was one of the miners we had sent here to retrieve. I continued with my search of the lab when we heard noise in the corner of the room. When it came out was a humanoid creature. It moved fast, launching itself off its hind legs and taking flight. It cleared the entire room in a blink of an eye. It tackled Ken to the ground. We tried to pull the thing off him, but the two front appendages shot into his neck before we knew it. The creature threw us off and spun around to face us. It's able to stand on two of its hind legs, showing it's also bipedal. It easily stands over 8 feet tall while it's on its legs. My team was frightened and opened fire. The bullets ricocheted off its glossy black skin, causing him to be sent back at the team. That's when a big burly man came running up behind the creature during the chaos and tackled it to the ground. Thankfully, the creature was caught by surprise, and the man pulled out a surgical saw and dismembered the limbs. He started with the two front appendages and continued from there. Doing that caused the creature to bleed out, and then after the chaos died down, that's when I realized a stray bullet killed James. What the fuck was that? Who the hell are you? I asked the stranger. My name's Anthony, he replied. And that, my friend, was something that lives deep underground. And trust me, our mining was what's disturbed it. Now, I call these ugly bastards insectoids, considering they're clearly mostly insect, but they have some humanoid characteristics. I noticed he's clearly in a miner's work uniform after I got a closer view. You've been here for 2 whole days? That's the best name you can come up with? Frank laughed. Well, if you got something better to call them, then I'm all ears, Anthony retorted. Frank shook his head. Yeah, didn't think so, numbnuts, so just sit there and let the adults talk. These bastards are bulletproof. As you see, they can't actually see you, but they can damn well hear you. Any sound can bring them to your location in seconds, and they never hunt alone. Cutting off the limbs disables them, and it eventually causes them to bleed out. This is the only way I've found to be able to kill them. But as you notice, frontal assault is best avoided. Yeah, I can see that. This doesn't make things easy. Alright, we need to be quiet and avoid detection at all costs. Just one problem. We don't have a way out. Any ideas on that? You think I would still be here if I'd found a way out? Seriously, like you think I was just waiting here for you fucks because you're so high and mighty? Like I couldn't do this without you? Yeah, that makes sense. I've been hiding in this room since these creatures showed up. They're nocturnal. They don't come out during the day unless they hear a sound. I just need to lay quiet and find a way out. I suggest you search the area for anything you can use as a weapon, considering the fact that your conventional weapons are useless. I searched through the room, not finding anything particularly useful other than a few axes, a flare gun, which happened to have a few extra cartridges. We prepared to set out further into the subterranean structure, and when we were armed with these new weapons, the team turned on their flashlights, and we cautiously exited what seemed to be a lab, slowly creeping our way through the structure. It looked like the rest of it had it up to that point. The walls were made of a metallic substance, while ventilation pipes ran the length of the hallway. There was no sign of these insectoids as we continued forward. I led the group, followed by the miner Anthony, Frank, Eric, and finally Mike. We ventured down the hall in a sound that might as well have been a herd of elephants came charging from the back of the group. Mike had dropped his flashlight, and the look on his face was one of pure terror. We all held our collective breath as we waited to see if anything would happen. And that's when a buzzing sound could be heard above us. We all slowly turned our flashlights upwards, only to witness the creatures diving in the direction of Mike, much like a hawk. They dive at their prey. That they were on him before any of us could react. Just imagine having to sit here and listen to his screams of anguish for what felt like an eternity was unbearable. We had to stay silent until they were finished. The mangled body of our former friend lay scattered all over the place. The hearts were wrenched as we stared at the dead body of another one of our friends, but the worst part was not being able to say anything. The only thing we did was performing the sign of the cross as a gesture of mourning. However, Frank was set into a frenzied rage upon when he saw his friend laying dead, ripped apart on the ground and left to rot. The scream that escaped his lips was so full of sorrow. And then this caused more of these creatures, these insectoids, to fly at him. Frank was able to take one of them out with a few slashes, but the other one mere moments later. Watching two of our friends die just minutes apart, it's not something any of us had expected while on that mission. The shock set in, but it's not the time to mourn our friends. We had to get out of there. We continued moving as quietly as possible, attempting to get out of the range of these horrible creatures. So we had to pick up our pace. We didn't bother to try to open any door that was sealed. We didn't want to make any unnecessary noise. We finally rounded a corner, and then the hallway opened up into a room that contained a bunch of cylinder pods, which held more of those creatures. Entering the room while making sure to stay quiet, we decided to explore. The room's circular. It contained a lot of pods with these insectoids inside, but we had no way of knowing if they were alive or not. What happened next can only be described as the slowest act of stupidity I have ever witnessed. Eric walked over to the pods and tapped on the glass. Yes, the stupid motherfucker tapped on the glass like he was some goddamn aquarium. The eyes of the creature and all the tubes simultaneously opened up. I ran, yelling for them to run as the glass began to break, and then the creatures clawed their ways out of the pod. Eric was just standing there like he had no idea what happened. We heard his screams all the way down the hallway while we were trying to escape the rest of the creatures. Far faster than we could have ever imagined, coming from all sides. We were pinned against the wall as they closed in. I did the only thing I could do. I grabbed the flare gun out of the pack and fired it at the group of creatures just to try to slow them down. But they didn't care about to savor the victory of the hunt. They just continued to try to strike down their prey. This was my last-ditch effort. The flare, it erupted and made contact with the creatures. They burst into flames, like they were making contact with dead wood. Noticing the smoke from the fire was being blown away from us, I looked over to Anthony. I pulled him in the opposite direction. If there's a breeze, then maybe, just maybe, there's a way out. We noticed that the hallway we were following gradually went uphill, traveling for what felt forever. We finally came out to a bright day on Mars. Oh, God. The red planet had never looked so beautiful. There, the two rovers were abandoned and inviting. We hopped into one of them and immediately made our way back to the ship. Upon our arrival, we noticed the loading bay was still wide open. Both the pilot and the security detail lay dead on our arrival. It looked like they had been dead since we had left. I can only assume that the sound of the rovers drew them to the ship shortly after we left. Hearing the sound of the ceiling coming down as we looked up to see at least five of those fucking creatures, and one of them was heading straight for us. Anthony pushed me out of the ship. I fell down the ramp. I lost the flare gun during the fall, and I looked up to see Anthony eaten alive. His screams alone were gut-wrenching. I heard him yell, "Shoot at him!" I jumped for the flare gun. I dropped during my fall. It was at least 10 feet from me. I was able to quickly retrieve it. I spun around and I noticed a massive home had been dug underneath the ship with hundreds of them pouring out. I got the flare gun, reloaded it, and fired a flare into the massive group. And I watched as they were engulfed in flames. But whatever the fire didn't kill, the massive explosion took care of. The ship blew up. I'm now stuck on this rock. There's nothing else to do, so pull out my radio and make one last transmission to the mission command. This is Jack. I was commander of the search and rescue team sent to retrieve the lost miners. Everyone else is dead except for me. Do not come to Mars. Do not come and try and rescue me. This planet is infested with some creatures, humanoid, insectoid, I don't care. They're extremely dangerous. Abandon every activity here. Save yourselves. Again, this is Jack, signing off. After the transmission ended, I decided I was going to take my helmet off and allow myself to join my team. This is my last report. And that was the end of that one. I think he did a great job. That was very nerve-wracking. I definitely think the feeling of terror he felt, you can kind of feel that creep up your spine just a little bit. The thought of everyone you knew being torn to pieces and left with no way of getting to safety. Now, again, this was written by P.A. Nightmares. His information is in the description. Please check out his Twitter. Also, there is a playlist on YouTube, that is, where multiple narrators have narrated his stories. He's a very good author. I highly recommend checking him out. Look at the description below. His information is right there. I'm definitely going to have to make sure he joins us here, voluntarily or not. The next story is, again, from P.A. Nightmares. It's titled, The Stranger's Call. One moment, I'm going to have a drink, and we'll get started. Isaac sat with his group of friends by the bonfire, Hey, have you heard about the details behind the death of the group of students a few years back? In unison, the group said, no. Well, then gather around, and I'll tell you what I heard from my brother. From what he told me, they called a cursed number, and then shortly after, all were found dead, one by one. Each one of the students' brains liquefied, blood coming out of their eyes and ears. One of the people in the group laughs. Isaac stops the story to look at the one who just laughed at him. His eyes lock with a kid named Alexander. Oh, you think this is a joke or something, Alex? First, it's Alexander, not Alex. And yes, I think this is a joke. Clearly, cursed numbers are a load of shit. None of them work. Yeah, we all know about this group of students dying, but more likely it was due to them overdosing. On top of that, if this number is what killed them, where'd you get it from? Where was I before I was so rudely interrupted? So the strange part was they all died in the exact same ways, days apart from one another. The tox report came back. There were no known drugs in their system. And as far as where I got the number, my brother got it from my father's office, and whoso just happens to be a cop, which you damn well know. But if you're so brave, Alex, why don't you call the number? The group laughed at Alexander, who looked at everyone and says, "Fuck you guys. I'm out of here." He got up and left, hearing Isaac call after him. "Looks like the baby's crawling back home to his mommy." Alexander doesn't even spare him a glance. He just shoots him the finger and he walks away. After having their laugh at Alexander's expense, Isaac extinguished the bonfire and the group headed into their tents for the evening. The next morning, as the sun started to rise, the group woke up and dismantled the tents. One of the people in the group spoke up. We should do it." Isaac, taken aback and forgetting last night's story. "Do what?" Ben spoke up. "We should call the number." "You really want to call that number? You don't actually believe that number is what killed them, do you?" "I don't know, but it couldn't hurt to call the number, could it?" "Well, if you're going to do it, if you're not going to do it, I'll do it myself." "Fine. Do what you want. Here's the number." Handing the piece of paper over, Ben pulls out his cell phone and dialed the number. As his phone begins to ring, he taps the speakerphone button. Shortly after, an eerie music plays through the speaker. It sounds like bagpipes, but distorted. The sound was high-pitched and began to hurt everyone's ears. Ben quickly ended the call. Seconds later, everyone's phone began to ring with an unknown number. None of them answered their phones, yet still the distorted tune of the bagpipes played regardless. Just as soon as it started, it stopped. "What was that?" Looking over at Ben. "How did you do that?" "Do what? Make that number call our phones like that?" Ben shook his head in protest. It's not me. I'm not sure what happened." "Yeah, right. All right, let's just finish packing up. A lot of you get lost. I'm going to enjoy the rest of my weekend before I have to go back to school." As the kids depart, Isaac goes inside, heading straight to his brother's room. "Hey, get out of my room," his older brother had said. Isaac says, "I need to talk to you. Hey, have you ever called that number you gave me?" "What? No. Why would I? Everyone knows they're just made up by people who have too much time on their hands." Isaac looked at his brother with concern in his voice. "Ben called that number, and when he did, some strange music played through his phone. And then when he ended the call, an unknown number called all of our phones, playing the same tune." "Dude, It's probably your little friend. He called all you at the same time and went into his settings to shut off his caller ID. Well, how do you explain the creepy tone? He used the playback tone. You were all just thought it was coming from your phones when it was coming from his. Fuck, that clever bastard. He pranked us all. We fell for it. Hook, line, and sinker. Well, if he thinks he's going to get away with this, he's got another thing coming. The next day at school, Isaac met up with his group of friends and then noticed Ben wasn't there. Hey, do you all know where Ben is? I got a bone to pick with him. His friends looked at him and said, I don't think he's here today. When the bus stopped to pick him up, he wasn't there. More like he's just hiding after the shit he pulled yesterday. Once I get a hold of him, I'm going to teach him a lesson or two. As if on cue, the loudspeaker sounds off. All students need to make their way to the gymnasium for emergency assembly. All students need to make their way to the gymnasium for emergency assembly. The group looked at each other and wondered what was going on, but they all followed the rest of their classmates to the gym without complaint. Once seated, Isaac noticed that standing beside the principal was his father. Dude, what's your dad doing here? One friend asked. Another friend. Oh, dude, looks like you're in trouble, bro. What'd you do? I didn't do anything. Shut up and listen. I'm sure we'll find out what's going on if you're just patient. As he said this, the principal began to speak. Students, it's my unfortunate responsibility to inform you that at some point in the evening, Ben Ashmore passed away. With me, I've Officer Flanagan. He'll tell you kids what happened, and if you have any questions, everyone at the school will be made available to answer them. Officer Flanagan begins to speak to the rest of the students. At some point last night, it appears that Ben had a stroke of some kind. When his mother found him, he was laying on the ground. There was blood coming from his eyes and ears, which is leading us to believe he died from a stroke. Any questions should be directed to your school staff or parents. We cannot disclose any more of the details of his death due to this being an open investigation. After the assembly was over, Isaac went and found his friends. After school, we need to meet up. We gotta discuss what happened. School passed quickly, and before he knew it, he was home. Shortly after, his friends began to arrive at his house. Follow me, Isaac says as he rushes into his house and then into his father's office. What are we doing in here? It's your father's office. If we get caught in here, we're dead. Listen. Ben's dead. I want to know how he died. They didn't push him further, but followed in silence. They both were still hurting from the loss of their friend and wanted to know what happened, as much as Isaac did. Once they got to the office, Isaac picked the lock to his father's filing cabinet and quickly found Ben's file. His dad had dated everything in alphabetical order. He was always very organized. Isaac read the report out loud. On the 30th of April, Ben Ashmore was found dead in his bedroom. At first glance, it appeared he had passed from a stroke. But on getting to the medical examiner, it was discovered his brain was turned to liquid, which caused the bleeding from his eyes and ears. Another detail stuck out. Like all the others had died in this manner, a burn on the ear. It's like the speaker of their phone blew out and burnt them. Questioning his friends, Isaac said, You know, guys, this is strange. But remember, it reminds me about another incident not too long ago. Remember how Jack and James moved away last school year? Without hesitation, Frank said, Yeah, I didn't know him well when I saw him around. What about him? I got a call from Jack. His brother and father went missing along with a lot of other dudes. He says a creature took him. It was wired, and what's now going on seems like it could be something similar, Isaac said. Jenna and Frank laugh at him. You're joking, right? Nothing's going on, buddy. He had a stroke. You heard your dad. Man, get some rest, please. You're worrying us. Jenna and I are going to go to my house. You want to come over? No, man. I'm just going to relax. Try to get my head straight. You're right. I must be going crazy. You guys take it easy. All right? Call me later. All right? Frank and Jenna left his house. Upon arriving at Frank's house, they rushed up to his room. They turned the music on and start to make out. They had other stuff on their mind, but figured this would be a welcome distraction. As they got lost in each other's company, the music stops and Frank's phone begins to ring. Annoyed, he grabs his cell phone and answers it. Hello? This better be good. No one was on the other end, but both of them heard a faint sound coming from the Bluetooth speakers where the sound was coming from. Both of them slowly walked up to the speakers. The sound grew louder and louder. It was the distorted bagpipe music they had heard days earlier. Once they got right in front of the speakers, as if on cue, a scream came through the speakers. The sound grew louder and louder until the speakers couldn't handle it any longer. They blew, launching sparks into their faces and burning them badly. However, the scream did not fade until the last spark of life left them, and blood was leaking from their ears and eyes. Isaac thought it was strange he hadn't heard from his friends for hours, so he gave him a call. The call went straight to voicemail, so he called the landline Frank's parents insisted on keeping. What dinosaurs, he said to himself. After a few rings, Frank's mother answered the call. When he asked where Frank was, his mother once again broke into sobs, telling him of the freak accident. But at this point, all Isaac could do was think of that he was next, and needed to find a way to stop whatever creature this was. He used the information Frank's mother had given him and what he already knew, typing keywords into a search engine. When he did this, many results came up. However, one stuck out. He couldn't believe it. However, deep inside himself, he knew what he was facing. It says it was a banshee, which he always thought was just a myth. But now, it became his reality. Isaac didn't sleep that night. He was far too scared. He was next, and the banshee would come for him in his sleep. Making it through the night, he sought out Alexander, hoping he could help. In a panic, Isaac grabbed Alexander and told him everything about the deaths of their friends. After hearing this story, Alexander replied, "What horse shit is this? You trying to prank me again? Man, seriously, when you left the next day, Ben called the number. A creepy, distorted tune of like bagpipes or something played. For what Frank's mom told me, she heard the music and then a loud shriek before running into the room and found him and Jenna dead on the floor just one day after Ben was found dead." Just as he finished, his phone rang. "I'm not going to answer it. If I ignore it, it'll be okay." Laughing at Isaac's fear, Alex said, "Are you for real, dude? Just answer your phone." "No!" Next thing Isaac knew, Alexander grabbed his phone. "Dude, it's just your mom. Please, Alex, don't answer the phone." "It's Alexander. Look, it's just your mom." Alexander answered the phone and gave it to Isaac. "Mom? Is that you?" The tune he had described earlier could now be heard playing as a shriek came from the phone, which grew louder and louder. Alexander went to ask him what was happening, but Isaac was now on the floor, convulsing, blood pouring from his ears and eyes. The phone overheated and shut down, leaving a burn on Isaac's lifeless body. Just as he was starting to understand what was happening and started to go for help, before he could get very far, his phone began to ring too. That was the end of that story. Now, honestly, if I hear bagpipes coming from my phone, I'm going to kill you, PA. I'll torture you. Okay, so I want to see who's here. We got Alex. We got Dustin, PA. We got Cage Misery as the Noose Titan. It's J.M. Nelson, author. Very good writer. Good to see you. Glad you're all here tonight. So again, the first two stories written by P.A. Nightmares. You can find more of his stories in the details of the description, that is, of this video, this stream. There is a link to a YouTube playlist with many of his stories, I believe. Just about all the ones he has written so far. Very, very good author. You can also find him on Twitter. Link is also in the description below. Now, the next story I'll be reading tonight is written by another one of the authors that I've read a few times. I'm sure you all remember Jgrupe. Very good author. I might have to bring him to the asylum. Make him a part of my patients list. Okay, so the title of this story, again by Jgrupe, details below. Please support these authors because I'm going to torture them. Oh yes. Title of this one is A Dark Cloud Follows Me. A dark cloud follows me wherever I go. It's been there as long as I can remember. Sometimes it's so close I can feel the static electricity of it. Other times it stays high above and I can almost forget that it's there for a while. If not for the shadow it constantly casts on me, blocking those sun's rays. I've told people about it. I've gone to see a therapist. She told me I believed what I was seeing was real, and that had to be very scary, but the cloud wasn't real. I was casting a literal shadow over myself by imagining my life this way. Ooh, that's what she said. I'm not the only one who can see it. Some people can even see that cloud that hangs above me. Only a handful of them. But my older cousin happens to be one of the few who can. He says he sees auras around people, but around me he can only see shadow, and the cloud above me gray and gloomy like a thunderhead. On the days when I'm happy, he quietly whispers to me when no one's around. So, you got that pesky cloud to leave you alone for a little while, huh? Good. But then, on my darkest days, it hovers just above me. Gray, black, and pregnant with thunder, pouring down rain on me that only we can see. He even sees it more clearly than I do, and can feel the cold splash of the pelting rain as it lands on me. This year has been worse than most. The dark cloud that follows me around is really basking in the year 2020. It's absolutely fucking loving it. Because it enjoys when I'm lonely, and it loves when I'm scared. It gets off on my anxiety and takes solace in my sadness. It swells as if it to rain and gets dark and full of lightning as the winter begins with its constant darkness and insufficient supply of vitamin D. My dad passed away a year and a half ago, and the holidays were difficult to contemplate without him here. The large family gatherings with his extended family that we had every year without fail was conspicuously absent this year, making it feel like it really wasn't Christmas at all. I ended up at work over the holidays instead of celebrating. I can feel it hovering over me, making it harder and harder to see what I'm doing in the gloom of it. And now a voice has come with it. Speaking of memories long forgotten, the things I've done in the past that made me cringe, they all come flooding back. And the cloud grows larger as I wince. The stupid things I've said fill it up like a meal when I think of them. Lightning crashes down around me, deafeningly loud. My heart skips a beat with sudden terror. That's never happened before. My wife comes running out of the bedroom to see the living room furniture is shaking and being lifted up from the ground and sent into the air in dervish as if a sudden tornado has invaded the house. She looks up in terrified wonder at the cloud which has formed in the living room. It's growing larger and swirling angrily, lightning illuminating it and thunderclaps rattling the room. Were you feeding it? Our voices could barely be heard over the whipping winds and the howling rain in the room, soaking the furniture and causing the floor to flood. I thought you couldn't see it. Of course I could. You bring that dark cloud with you wherever you go when you're feeling shitty. It pours rain on all of us, but we try to ignore it because we love you. Maybe we shouldn't have ignored it, though. The lightning suddenly quieted. I took a deep breath in. It was difficult to think with that cloud still hanging there large, black, full of hate above me. It was still terrifying and distracting. That was when I felt her wrap her arms around me in an embrace. The cloud suddenly began to break apart. Light began to poke through in places, and it began to part as we stepped outside to enjoy the brisk winter air, to see the sunshine, even if it was only for a little while. Gotta say, that was pretty powerful. I like that story. Very well written. Very well. Everybody make sure to leave comments in Reddit for these authors, or for PA. You can even say it here. He's with us now. If you loved his stories, we want to make sure that we are supporting these authors, because I'm going to torture them to make more for me. They're stuck with me forever now, and they thought they were just giving me a story. No. They were giving me their lives. Sort of. Okay. Let's go on to the next story. This one is from a new author, Psyoptic Nerve is the author. Again, link is in the description. This is titled Ding Dong Ditch. It's a stupid thing to be doing. I have no problem admitting that. We were 13. Too young to drive anywhere or see anything good at the theater, which made our choices fairly limited on that humid summer night. Mark was our ringleader, without a doubt. He had all the characteristics that made our parents apprehensive about us hanging out with him. Just go up there and ring the bell, dude. Then run like hell. It's pretty simple, he explained to Josh, who was nervously chewing on his thumbnail. Josh was the dork we always dragged along with us so we could make jokes at his expense. No matter how much we ragged on him, he always came back the next day, eager for our approval. What if they come out? Josh asked, his eyes darting around at our leering faces. Mark scoffed. Following his lead, me and Ryan did the same. You run, stupid! Mark, Ryan, and I hid behind some shrubs across the street as we watched Josh make his way up to our first victim's driveway. He glanced toward us before he reached for the bell. We snickered at how afraid he was. Even from where we were crouched, we could see him shaking. Ding dong. As soon as he pushed the bell, he was in full sprint to us. Nice going, Ryan said, clapping him on the back once he dove into the bushes with us. Mark kept his eyes on the door, which finally swung open. An old man glanced around the empty street, swearing into the night before he finally slammed the door shut. We all fell over, cackling at how angry he had been. Okay, who's next? Mark asked, cutting his laughter short suddenly. I gulped, hoping it wouldn't be me. Go ahead, Steve. Mark smiled wickedly, seeming to read my anxiety. I nodded, mentally preparing myself as we walked. We made our way down the street, going about 6 houses down before Mark found a worthy target. It was a one-story ranch with all the lights on. Across the street, that is, was an identical house, which he quickly decided would be perfect for Ryan to hit at the same time. At the door, I signaled across the road to Ryan that I was ready, giving him a thumbs up. He looked back grimly, returning the gesture. Ding, ding. I fled, the wind howling in my ears as I blindly ran to where Mark and Josh were waiting. Ryan was right behind me, nearly leaping on top of me just as the doors opened. I blinked a couple times, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The exact same man was staring across the street at himself, both wearing scowls on their faces. They were both balding, with horn-rimmed glasses, wearing slacks, and holding a newspaper to their chest. What the... Ryan gasped, pointing back and forth between them. Dude, that's sketchy. It was the first time I heard Mark sound uncertain of anything. It was unnerving. Josh looked horrified, pulling his shirt up over his mouth, staring wide-eyed at the clones. We all held our breath as they nodded to each other before closing the doors again. What the hell was that? I wondered out loud. We sat silently before Mark broke the silence by chuckling. I don't know, dude. That was weird. Okay, I guess it's my turn now. The rest of us exchanged looks, our eyes wide. I couldn't believe he still wanted to play, but at the same time, I think we were all excited to see him put his money where his mouth was. Despite the impending feeling of dread, we trudged on, lagging behind Mark as he scoped out the rest of the neighborhood. I'm not sure who brought it up first, but somebody eventually noted how they'd never seen this part of town before. And it was not long after we were all agreeing. Where were we? Each house was exactly the same, yet when we looked back at the ones we had passed, they were completely unique and different than we remembered. Josh began panting and sort of crying as he slowly fell behind us. Ryan and I were chattering away, wondering what was going on, and Mark remained undeterred. Man, I just need to find the perfect one, he kept muttering to himself as he went, squinting ahead and disregarding anything we had said to him. By then, I was ready to turn back and run home. And I think Josh and Ryan were right there with me. "Aha! There it is!" Mark shouted, interrupting our hushed debate. He pointed ahead, looking at a house that was all by itself on a dead-end road. A collective shudder ran through the rest of us, all of us staring at Mark like he was insane. "Dude, no way, let's go home," Ryan said, looking at Josh and I for support. We nodded aggressively, trying our best to pull him away from his task. Mark looked back at us incredulously. "Are you kidding me? Fucking wimps," he shouted, turning on his heel, jogging right up to the house. We all looked at each other, unanimously deciding to make it a run for it in silence. I looked back to see Mark ring the bell. As soon as he did, the door swung open. The same horn-rimmed glasses appeared in front of Mark, a sinister grin on the vase behind them. Mark rose. He tried to back away from the strange man, but fell onto the driveway. Ryan, he pulled my shoulder and pulled me away from whatever happened next. The only thing I can tell you is I have never heard a human being scream like that before. We kept running. Josh was bawling and barely able to move. Me and Ryan got behind him and shoved him onward, doing the best to guide his dead weight forward. He finally flopped over, falling to his knees, making us trip over him in the process. I was in the middle of scolding when I caught sight of what made him stop so suddenly. Every single house around us was identical. The door wide open, and the same balding man in slacks, grinning back at us. They were closing in on us, taking slow, deliberate steps forward. Ryan regained his senses first, tugging at Josh and pleading with him to get up. I was still frozen, unable to do anything more than just stare at my impending doom as it approached. After Ryan slugged me in the shoulder, I realized he had been screaming at me the entire time. "Help me get him up! Let's go!" he was wailing, feebly trying to get Josh to his feet. I shook my head at him, knowing there was nothing we could do for him. Josh had given up. It was written on his face. We left him lying in the street. They descended on him moments after we ran for it, his blood-curdling screams echoing off the pavement. I sobbed while we sprinted forward, ashamed at myself for leaving poor Josh behind. Ryan kept calling to me, but his words made no sense. It was like he was speaking a different language. The houses we ran by were all the same. Clones springing out from behind their doors as soon as we approached. It was like an infinite loop. There was no way out. We ran for as long as we could, but it made no progress. Our surroundings never changed. Eventually, Brian slowed to a jog and then halted completely. I urged him on, but I could tell by the way he was breathing he had hit his limit. I looked at him in the eyes, trying to find something to say to him. He looked back, and the fear fading from his face as he accepted what was to come. "Just keep going without me," he gasped, falling to his knees. I wish I could say I said something to him, anything to ease his cruel fate. The truth, I didn't waste a second. I turned away from him as soon as the words left his mouth. My lungs were on fire. My footsteps pounded the blacktop, but I refused to let myself stop moving. I kept my eyes down, focusing only on the road beneath my worn-out sneakers. After what seemed like hours, I arrived on the road we had started on. I collapsed on the sidewalk, screaming for help. Behind me, the clones had disappeared. The houses were no longer identical. The same old man we had first pranked came running out to see what was wrong. By feverish tale made little sense to him, and he called me an ambulance. My friends were never found. Not a shred of evidence was recovered. Of course, my retelling of it earned me a trip to the psych ward. Many people were suspicious of my involvement in their disappearances. I spent a lot of time in mental health facilities, and despite what I told them to get released, I still believe everything happened exactly as I told the police originally. All I can tell you is, if the houses in your neighborhood start to look the same, don't ring any doorbells. Damn good story. You feel that chill? Yeah, it's supposed to be there. Just make sure you're not looking into the dark corners of your room as they get darker and darker and darker. I see Josie has joined us. Hello, Josie. The next story is by Blue Wake, and I believe he is here with us. Jared, again, this is that author, so this story is titled, Why I Quit My Job as a Hitman. You can find his information for his Reddit link in the description below. Okie dokie. So, let's get started. Well, I'll make sure to hand out some more medication to my patients. Guess it's not scary enough. You have to make it worse. All right. Again, titled, Why I Quit My Job as a Hitman by Blue Wake. I waited as the old man took his time, retrieving a fat manila envelope from a chest of drawers in the living room. I flipped through the wad of bills inside after he handed it to me. You ain't got to worry, the old man said. It's all there. I traveled a ways down a backcountry road to get to the farmhouse. Once majestic, the tendrils of decay had grasped a hold of the house. Great big flakes of white paint had peeled off the clapboard siding, revealing the dead timber underneath it. All things at the end will rot. The money was worth the trip. I'd charged a higher sum for this job because of its particular specifications. $80,000, half before, the other half after it was done. I retrieved the Polaroid, soon to be burned, that I kept folded in my back pocket. The old man put his hand out. I don't need you to show me, he said. I know you saw it through. I trust your reputation. Not much room for mistakes in your business anyhow. Treacherous as you might be, I can count on you to get a deed done. Treacherous. The old man had a lot of nerve speaking to me that way, given what he'd asked me to do. The old man had wanted the target shot, stabbed through the heart, and dismembered. He'd specifically instructed the target had to be decapitated and his hands removed. Other than that, the old man had said, cut him up any which way you like. From there, I was to place the target in a burn barrel, light it ablaze. To say the old man wanted the target dead was an understatement. He wanted him annihilated, reduced to ash. I wasn't in the habit asking paying customers why. Unless I needed information to get it done, I didn't want to hear it. But this time, I wondered. I'd lured the target to a secluded place I won't identify, though I suppose it doesn't really matter. First thing I noticed about him was he was so much younger than the old man. Mid-20 tops, and that was generous. I couldn't imagine what the kid had done to make the old man so hell-bent on killing him. Couldn't have been business. I knew every organized crime figure in the area, and the old man just wasn't one of them. Had to be personal then. I still couldn't fathom what vendetta the old man had against a kid decades his junior. But I set the question aside and did my job. I couldn't keep the issue out of my mind for long. Inside the farmhouse, I noticed a frayed photo among the dusty picture frames scattered along the mantel. Though he was younger and less wrinkled in the photograph, I recognized the old man. He was picnicking in a field, one arm around a border collie dog and another around a brown-haired woman. In front of the adult sat two children, a smiling young girl who looked much like her mother and an older boy with a 1,000-yard stare. His gaze was unsettling. It was almost as if from that still moment in the past, he was sitting in judgment. Despite his age in the photo, I recognized him immediately. It's hard to forget someone you shoot point blank. A hint of uncharacteristic compunction formed inside me. Most who met the barrel of my gun were folks as knee-deep in the underworld as I was, who'd done bad things to worse people and faced the consequences. This was different. Your own son? I asked. I didn't think you asked questions, the old man said. What was that kid? 25? What could he have done? He's a bit older than he looks. I looked at him for a moment, let him sense my distaste. The old man sighed. I'll show you something if you care to see. I followed the old man out behind the house to a tall, sturdy tree. In the shade, under the branches, was a weather-beaten makeshift cross. Daisy, it read, in faded black lettering. She was a good animal, the old man said, reminiscing. I've always liked dogs. I feel much softer about them than I do people. And if the man's son had done something to a family dog, that was terrible. But I couldn't help feeling it warranted a lesser response than a bullet. We walked back inside through the rear door. Always was something wrong with that boy, old man muttered. Born bad. So that's it, huh? I said. It was about the dog. The old man shook his head. He took a sister a couple years later. Broke his mother's heart to pieces, and a few years after that, he took her too. Let me get this straight. You let your son kill your dog, your daughter, and your wife. I tried to stop him. You said this happened several years apart. You didn't get him some help, institutionalize him? It ain't that simple, the old man said calmly. What's complicated about it? That boy ain't normal. The old man handed me two thin items out of the same drawer from which he produced the envelope. Laminated and memorial cards of the sort handed out at funerals, complete with images of the deceased. One memorialized a young girl, and the other an adult woman. Though they both aged a few years, there was no doubt I'd seen them in the photo on the mantel. What I found curious were the dates of the death. The girl died in 1980, and her mother in 84. Given the age of the kid whose body I burned in a 55-gallon drum, it wasn't possible for him to have killed the two. Matter of fact, it wasn't even possible for him to be the woman's son. I began to think the old man wasn't as sharp as he seemed. "It's about sundown," old man said. "You don't want to be out here alone in the dark. Let me see you out." The old farmhouse was situated atop a grassy hill, and its grand front porch overlooked the road below. I was starting down the steps when the old man spoke. "Where'd you get rid of the body?" I told him. He grunted before shifting a rocking chair on the porch so it faced the east side of the road. He sat, adjusting his veteran ball cap before reaching to his side. For the first time, I noticed a pump shotgun leaning against the house. I gripped the handle of the pistol I was concealing. "No need," the old man said, nestling the pump in his lap. "If I had a mind to shoot you, I'd done it already." "If you're such a great shot," I said, "why'd you hire me?" "Shooting ain't my problem," he replied. "Done it plenty. First time I put a slug in him was when I seen what he'd done to Daisy. It was the sawing and burning I needed you for. Don't have the stomach for it myself. In any case," the old man continued, "you should get on your way. If he comes back, he'll be angry, and despite our efforts, I reckon he will." I drove back east where I came down the road, feeling a bit troubled. This, I told myself, is why you don't ask questions. I tried to forget about it, and I almost did, until I passed a solitary figure on the opposite shoulder. Just as the sun slipped below the horizon and the shadow overtook the two-lane road. I didn't need sunlight to know who he was. His face was already imprinted on my memory. He walked steadily, with a purpose. The walk of a man who was coming home. I didn't stop or turn around. I just kept driving. I had already done my job. Killing him twice, that wasn't part of the deal. Well, I wonder, did he happen to have the devil's child who come back for revenge? I wonder if he did something to his son long ago that made him come back again and again to punish the old man. What do you think? I don't know. Guess we'll never know. We'll go ahead and start on another story. This one is, well, from Blue Wake. Hope you enjoyed that telling, Mr. Medrano, Jared Medrano, I believe, a.k.a. Blue Wake. I really enjoyed that last story. Very well written. I like that. Definitely had that sinister feel. Are you sure you wouldn't want to join us here at the asylum? I'm sure we could definitely make room for you. We have plenty of empty ones for you to fill. This story is titled, "Has Anyone Been to Chester's Kid Zone?" When I was a kid, my dad would leave me alone in various places while he went off to drink. The most frequent of these was a laundromat that happened to be across the street from his local bar. Sometimes he would take me to do the laundry with him before telling me he had to step out for a few minutes. Dad would give me some quarters for the arcade machine in the back of the laundromat. One of those racing games with the attached steering wheel. To be honest, I kind of liked being left at the laundromat. I didn't have video games at home, and the arcade machine was a nice escape. Anyway, the story isn't about the laundromat, but the fact that I liked that damn game so much might explain why Dad thought Chester's Kid Zone looked like the perfect place to leave me while he drowned his sorrows. I believe I was 8 at the time. I was stuck running errands with my father on a hot summer day, and he drove out to a hardware store located in a strip mall off the highway. The strip mall consisted of 2 long, rundown buildings which faced each other at a right angle. Among the various businesses that the buildings contained, all which had seen better days, was a dive bar at the end of the strip. After we left the store, Dad looked longingly at the bar. He wanted to go in, but he didn't know what to do with me. I watched him reluctantly fight off temptation as we walked to the car. Dad was putting the keys in the ignition when he paused, looking at something in the distance. At the end of one of the buildings, tucked into an easy-to-miss corner of the strip mall, was a set of double doors underneath a cartoon font signage. Chester's Kid Zone. Dad pulled the keys out of the ignition and retrieved his wallet. Here, he said, handing me $3. Go play some games at that arcade place. I'll come back to get you in an hour. I've been to Chuck E. Cheese a few times, and I was sure $3 wouldn't buy enough tokens to play for an hour. I also knew better than to challenge Dad. I walked sheepishly through the double doors as he headed to the far end of the strip mall. I don't remember everything about Chester's Kid Zone, so I won't try to fill in the blanks. But I do remember a few things vividly. The first thing I noticed, there were no adults in sight, just a handful of other kids. There was a snack counter, but no employees behind it. Kids would wander up to the glass case and retrieve prepackaged snacks and candy before running back out to the arcade floor. I took a pretzel myself, but it was stale. Tokens were dispensed by a machine that took dollar bills. To my surprise, the $3 I brought were more than enough. After I fit the first dollar, tokens began pouring out. The receptacle where the tokens landed overflowed with gold coins. I stuffed my pockets until they couldn't hold anymore. As I walked away to check out the arcade floor, I heard the clinking of tokens still dropping out. To my 8-year-old eyes, the arcade floor seemed huge, much larger than the building looked from the outside. Unoccupied game machines crisscrossed the floor in a maze-like fashion, kids occasionally scampering between them and disappearing again. The interior of Chester's Kid Zone was bathed in a dark shade of purple. I recall the soles of my sneakers sticking to the carpets as I walked across the arcade. They hadn't been cleaned recently, if ever. In fact, the whole place was dingy. Once or twice, I saw a mouse skitter across the floor. Long cracks ran up the walls, which were bare except for a few haphazardly hung photos of Chester, the establishment's mascot. I didn't recognize most of the arcade games. Those I were familiar with had handwritten signs of out of order taped to their screens. I tried my hand at some of the others, but found most of them strange and difficult to play. One game I have a fuzzy memory of, I used a joystick to guide a player character through a never-ending array of hallways. Wolf-like creatures lurked the hallways, chasing the player character, and there was no way to fight them off. The machine didn't even have any other buttons aside from the joystick. The player character just ran through the virtual hallways until the wolf things caught up and tore him limb from limb. Computer-generated blood eventually splattering the screen so I couldn't see anything anymore. I've since scoured websites that catalog old arcade games from the era, but I can't seem to find anything about this one. The other children struck me as a bit off. They mostly kept to themselves, playing alone. And then there was the way they were dressed. I was raised without much money, and I was painfully aware of what the other kids were wearing. From oversized, stained t-shirts to torn jeans, the kids at Chester's wore clothing even more ragged than the hand-me-downs I got teased for at school. I bumped into one of the other kids as he darted out from behind a row of gaming machines. A boy about my age, sporting a bowl cut which had grown slightly too long. He seemed nervous. I could tell that behind the mop of hair obscuring his eyes, he was looking at his feet. "I'm Ricky," he said shyly. "Want to play?" I was just glad to have made a friend in the odd place. Ricky and I spent more time playing arcade games than talking. When I asked how long he'd been there, he just shrugged. We'd been playing games for a while when a sound like a tornado siren emanated from the far wall where an elevated stage sat behind a set of purple curtains. "That means it's showtime," Ricky said. "We have to go watch." Ricky and I, along with every other kid at Chester's, took seats at a set of tables in front of the stage. The curtains opened to reveal a tall animatronic figure I recognized as Chester. Chester was an anthropomorphic mammal, like a badger or a weasel. At least I think that's what it was supposed to be. It had various points of articulation, able to rotate its head and body, raise its arms up and down, and move its eyes in various directions. It wore a mechanic's jumpsuit complete with a name tag. Dark smears that looked like oil stains covered the outfit. The Chester animatronic went on to perform a show, most of which was unremarkable. I only distinctly recall two things. One is a song and a dance in which the animatronic simied unnaturally, its mouth flapping open and shut as a speaker somewhere inside played an off-key jingle. "Fun, fun, fun at Chester's Kids Zone. Here's your place to escape. Laugh and play at Chester's Kids Zone. You can stay here every day." The second thing is at the end of the performance, after completing its routine, the animatronic clumsily clapped its hands together. "It's time to pick a special guest." The animatronic's head swiveled slowly, as if scanning the crowd. Some of the other kids squirmed. Chester's head stopped mid-swivel before the animatronic raised its left arm. It was pointing to a boy who sat alone at a table a few dozen feet from Ricky and I. "You're today's special guest," Chester exclaimed. "Come on up." "Me?" the boy whimpered. "Come on up," the animatronic repeated, its voice suddenly almost deafening. The boy stood up and walked to the stage. The animatronic raised its heavy arm awkwardly. The boy winced, and I saw that the animatronic was gripping him by the back of the neck, the way you grab a dog by its scruff. "That's all for today. See you tomorrow," Chester said pleasantly. The curtain began to draw. The boy on stage was trembling. Just before the drapes closed fully, a dark stain spread across his pant leg. "What's going on?" I asked Ricky. I felt uneasy. "It's just part of the show," he replied. "Want to go play in the tubes?" Ricky gestured toward a structure across the building. A massive, elevated jungle gym, the interconnected set of tubes that snaked across the ceiling. Kids could enter and exit the tubes via networks of tall towers with walls made of netting intended to be climbed, and enclosed slides, and even a fire pole. "Sure," I said. As I followed Ricky towards the tubes, he turned. "Just watch out," he said. "There's a weird girl in there sometimes." Ricky and I climbed up and began to crawl through the purple plastic tubes together. Through porthole-like windows, we could see the arcade floor below. The tubes had an unpleasant smell. As I followed Ricky throughout its twists and turns, it got stronger. By the time we approached a sharp curve, the stench was overpowering. Ricky crawled far enough to peek around the curb and started to backpedal. He made a full turn, so he was now facing me. "She's here," he whispered. "I'm going back. Use the fire pole. She can't slide down." Ricky squeezed past me, crawling in the direction we came. I wondered what so bothered Ricky about this girl. I needed to see for myself. I continued crawling, making sure not to breathe through my nose as I got closer. Finally, I reached the other side of the curve. The plastic tube had reached its end in a circular chamber several yards ahead. In the chamber was a girl several years older than me. She was filthy. Her matted hair pooled on the floor of the tube around a dress so tattered it barely clung to her body. More disturbing, she lacked a single limb. What should have been in each an arm or leg ended in a rough stump. The fact she was even able to remain upright was a feat. She hunched low to the ground, chewing frantically on something small and furry trapped between her arm stumps. Beside her was a putrid pile of what looked like guts and fur. The stack of neatly separated pink tails confirmed the girl had been eating rats. She didn't know I was there. I began to crawl and reverse slowly, trying to make each knee fall as soft as possible. I had almost gotten back around the curve when the squeak of my sneaker against the plastic echoed throughout the tubes. The girl snapped her head upward, fixing her wild-eyed gaze on me. Red liquid dribbled down her chin. She snarled. I frantically turned my body to crawl the other direction. Sensing that I was leaving, she dropped the rat and began to scramble towards me. I crawled madly through the tubes. I looked back and saw her advancing in a prone position much faster than anyone without a single limb should ever be able to crawl. I kept going, navigating bends and forks in the tubes, not knowing if they'd trap me in another dead-end chamber. The whole time I heard thumping around me as the girl propelled herself along throughout the tubes. Finally, I came across a tube with a hole in the floor and a metal bar extending through it. I gripped the fire pole and wrapped my legs around it. Angry, high-pitched shrieking sounded from above me as I slid down to ground level. Back on the arcade floor, I looked up at the tubes. The limbless girl glared at me from one of the porthole windows, her eyes burning with rage. I fled, making my way to the front of the establishment and pushing through the double doors. I ran all the way down to the other end of the strip mall and right into the bar my father was in. I knew I'd get a beating later for that, but that was better than spending another second in Chester's Kids Zone. I never heard a thing about Chester's Kids Zone from anyone again. I passed by the strip mall a few years later, and all that remained was an empty retail space. Until now, I only thought of Chester's in brief flashes. I guess I don't like to think about it. The memory makes me feel dirty, like Chester's was, and trapped, like I'm still in the tube, scrambling to find the exit. The limbless girl thumping just around the bend. But recently, I decided I wanted to know more about Chester's. If anything else, I wanted to confirm that it was real and not just a childhood fever dream I convinced myself was true. I asked my father about the day he dropped me off in Chester's Kids Zone, but he didn't know what I was talking about. Not surprising. Dad's lost memory, the same place he lost everything else. The bottom of a bottle. I've searched online, trying to find any information I could about Chester's, but had no luck with either current or historical business listings. I vaguely eventually came across the thread in an obscure forum where a couple of posters referred very vaguely to Chester's. The locations they mentioned, several of them were nowhere near me, but the general descriptions were accurate. When I pulled the website up again this morning, the thread was gone. The link I'd saved redirected to a 404 page. And that's how I ended up here. At this point, I just want to know I'm not crazy. To anyone reading this, have you ever been to Chester's Kids Zone? I wonder if we called the asylum Chester's Kids Zone, if it would be similar. Well, I do make you guys make those hamsters dance. And they dance so well. Good job. We're going to move on to another story, a new author. This one is ViciousMock. Titled, I work at a drug testing facility. There's something wrong with the volunteers in room 301. Again, please support these authors by going to their Reddit pages. I have them linked below in the description. Support them because they're going to be stuck with me forever and ever and ever. Maybe. It depends if they can write good enough for me. Otherwise, they may just end up like my other subjects. People's first reactions when they find out what I do is always, isn't that dangerous? And then I explain I'm not the one having the drugs tested on me. I'm the one taking care of the volunteers. Their second question is always, isn't that dangerous? Not like you might be imagining. In the 7 years I've worked here, I've never seen anyone have a seriously bad reaction to any of the drugs being tested. By the time they get to us, the drugs are already quite far down the line of being tested. People think scientists are randomly mixing chemicals together and seeing what happens to people, but it's not like that. Drug trials can range from a few days to several weeks, and during that time, the volunteers stay in the facility. Their vitals, blood pressure, EKGs, etc. are taken regularly, and there's always doctors around to check on them and to interpret the tests. Everyone in the building is first aid trained, and you can rest assured that if there's ever an emergency alarm goes off, 20 members of staff will rush in within seconds, all ready to administer first aid. The only times I've ever known an emergency alarm to go off has been that a volunteer leaned on the button by accident. There are usually 3 or 4 different trials happening at the same time, and while I may know that it's for a diabetes drug or antidepressant, I don't get too many details. My job is to follow the directions, make sure volunteers eat exactly what is prescribed, and do the tests at exactly the right time. It's repetitive, but not in a bad way. At least that was until recently, when a new group of volunteers were checked into room 301. What immediately struck me was the fact that rather than being the usual 21-year-old young, healthy men, they were much older. Most of them were in their 60s or later, and while not unheard of, it was unusual. The strangest part was we were under strict orders only to enter the rooms between 8 a.m. and 6 p.m. every day. Every test imaginable was to be administered during those times, but outside of those times, nobody was to enter the room under any circumstances. What if something happens? I said. How do we... Under no circumstances must you enter the room, even if the alarm goes off. But then what? Under no circumstances. My colleagues and I looked at each other, all extremely uncomfortable, believing we must have misunderstood something. I opened my mouth to argue again, but was silenced with a stern look from my boss, Harry. After speaking between ourselves, we came to the conclusion that the doctors must be on call to go in if something happens. That was squashed immediately that evening when 3 alarms in the room went off at once. We all instinctively ran over, only to have our way blocked by Harry. I told you that. They need help, I argued. I tried to push past, but within seconds, security had arrived and I was on my final warning. Before leaving that day, I went to the office to find the files for the study. Case 4510666. Confidential. Redacted. Has ordered a 2-week residential study for the drug redacted. The function of the drug is redacted and aims to be used primarily for redacted. Known side effects include redacted. And on it went like that. I'm not redacting information for the internet. It's literally the file I read. At home, I looked at my schedule for the next day. I was positioned almost exclusively to work in room 301, starting at 8 a.m. Porridge again? One of the men complained as I sat his tray down in front of him. Can't you at least put some honey in it? Sorry, I smiled. He smiled back. I'm Victor. Hi, I'm Sally, I said. Pleasure to meet you. He seemed completely normal. All of them did. I looked around, and nobody looked as if anything out of the ordinary had happened to them at all last night. So, how are you feeling? I said. Fine, he said. Except this tastes like cardboard. He wasn't the only one struggling. Breakfast time ended up taking 30 whole minutes as everyone fought their way through the bowl of porridge. I made a mental note to let the kitchen staff know. Even plain porridge shouldn't be this awful. But if the only problem was that they were given bland and unappetizing food, I wondered if I had been overreacting last night. Every volunteer was alive and well and talkative. And they joked with me. They flirted with me. They complained to me. Everything was normal. I whipped around, quickly taking their blood pressure while Alice, my coworker, followed along doing their EKGs, and then Eric, another coworker, weighed the volunteers. It was an uneventful day. At 6 p.m., we left the room as instructed, and I moved to another room to finish the last 2 hours of my shift. As luck would have it, I was supposed to be off the next day, but a colleague called in sick. She was supposed to be working in 30 room, and room 301, and I agreed to take her shift. It started at 6 a.m., and I spent the first 2 hours in another room feeling fidgety and impatient. At 8 a.m., I walked into 301. All the blinds were still down, and the room was completely dark. Every single volunteer was soundlessly asleep. "Good morning," I said softly as I moved to draw up the blinds. A general roar of annoyance filled the room. "Rise and shine. It's time for breakfast." Today, they did not look good at all. Their hands shielded their eyes from the light, and as the minutes passed, they didn't seem to adjust. They started on their porridge one-handed, their eyes covered, and none of them joked with me. They barely said a word. Not a single one of them managed to finish their porridge. I went to get the doctor. Sensitivity to light and loss of appetite. Yes, they're common side effects of the drug. Just write a note in the file. Did they eat their other meals okay? I asked. "Write a note," the doctor repeated. But if they're not getting enough food, then... And then, seeing his face and remembering I was on my last warning, I stopped. I was in charge of taking blood samples that morning. I went to the first bed. It was the man from yesterday who complained about the porridge, Victor. He looked pale. "Are you feeling unwell?" "I'm fine," he snapped. "Do what you need to do." His hands still covering his face from the night. Some of the other volunteers had their covers pulled up around their heads. It really wasn't that bright out. It was the middle of winter. I adjusted the blinds so the room was as dark as it could be while still allowing us to see what we were doing, but it didn't seem to help any. Taking the bloods did not go well. I always pride myself on being able to get blood, even if you don't have good veins for it. But even I couldn't. I asked a colleague for help, and then another. Finally, we had to get the doctor. "What have you done? He looks like a goddamn pincushion." He let out an irritated sigh. "Get out of the way." And I did. But I watched. He struggled too. When he finally managed to draw a vial of blood, it was dark. Darker than I'd ever seen. I gasped loudly. "Get out," said the doctor to me. I was quickly pulled into the office with Harry. "I don't know what's gotten into you," he said. "There's something wrong," I replied. "That there is," he said. "The doctor told me you gasped as the patient had his blood drawn. You alarmed him. He had to spend 10 minutes explaining that everything was okay. You'll be lucky if he doesn't make a complaint about your unprofessionalism." I was just worried. His blood was nearly black. "A common side effect," he said again. "Nothing for you to worry about. You're not a doctor. You do the tests. You report your findings. You express your concerns privately to the doctor, who will take action if there's something to worry about." "It's my job to keep them safe," I argued. "It's all of our jobs." "I think you should go home," he said. "Get some rest. We can do the rest of the day without you." "I don't need to." "Go home," he repeated. I was on a short shift the next day. Harry acted as if nothing happened. "You'll be in room 203 today. Eczema cream. They just arrived yesterday. Make sure you read the instructions." I should have had expected I wouldn't be put in room 301 again, but I was secretly disappointed. When I came downstairs to the staff room for lunch, I heard arguing in hushed voices from inside. I pressed my ear to the door. It was Eric and Harry. 6 breaths a minute, and then 3 today. He needs taking to the emergency room. The doctors have checked, and he's completely fine. He must be counting wrong. I've been doing this job for 6 years, and I know... Well, maybe it's time you need retraining then, isn't it? He's fine. Get back to work. The door flew open, almost smacking me in the face, and Eric stormed past me without a word. Harry glared at me. I knew I had to pretend I hadn't been eavesdropping. Hey, how are you doing, Harry? I grinned brightly. What's for lunch today? He looked relieved. Leftover chicken curry, but actually I just finished. Have a good lunch, Sally. It was the weekend then. I did housework and watched movies with my boyfriend, but I really wasn't there. I couldn't concentrate on anything. I couldn't think of anything else but room 301. There's something wrong. There's something we weren't being told. On Sunday, my phone rang at 5 a.m. It was Eric. Alice was dead. She had committed suicide. I hadn't known Alice well. She only started a few months ago, and she was only 19, but she seemed happy. I would have never guessed that she had been suffering from depression. It just didn't make sense. A thought came to my mind, and I couldn't help but ask. Eric, was she at work yesterday? Yeah, she was working the 12 to 8 shift. And what room was she in? I think you know the answer to that. And he hung up the phone. There was nothing else for it. I had to go into room 301, and I had to get in there after 6 p.m. It wasn't as difficult as I would have imagined. With Alice gone and the fact that the other coworkers were also clearly beginning to fuss over room 301 as much as I had, they put me back into 301. But not before we were all called to a morning meeting. By now, you've all heard about Alice. It was a tragic and untimely death. She had so much left to offer the world. She was taken too soon, and it is unfair. Her family wants you to know there will be a memorial service on Friday. For those who are close with Alice and want to rearrange their shifts to be able to attend, please let me know. We're also doing a collection in Allison's name for a local charity, Like Minds. They do fantastic work raising awareness of and supporting those with mental health conditions. We all need time to grieve Alice, but we also need to continue with the excellent work we're doing here. While we're together, I want to raise some points, and I want to stop any rumors that have been started. Some of you have become increasingly concerned about the side effects you're seeing in room 301. Please rest assured that all volunteers are well aware of the possible side effects before giving their informed consent. They all agreed to this study and are being compensated fairly for their time and slight discomfort. As always, all volunteers also have the right to withdraw their consent and exit the study at any time. As is sometimes the case, these side effects often look worse to us than they are. The volunteers in there have been experiencing a loss of appetite, but rest assured we are making sure they get all the nutrition they need. They have become quite sensitive to light, so the blinds will remain closed each day and low lighting is being used in the rooms during the day. There are just some of the possible side effects. If you notice any additional side effects, please speak privately with the doctor. They are more than qualified to take appropriate action if they deem necessary. I would like to remind you that the health and safety of our volunteers is of the utmost importance here, and I am pleased to say we have such caring, dedicated professionals with us. However, it is also important to avoid panic. Please stay calm around the volunteers and discuss any matters privately with the doctor. The company that has funded the study may decide to make adjustments to dosage and administration to minimize some of these side effects. However, the drug, if successful, will be an exceptional breakthrough in medicine. These side effects would be more than worth the result. But what's the drug for? We haven't even been told, interrupted Eric. At this time, that is confidential. It's never been confidential before. I don't understand. There will be time for questions at the end of the meeting, Eric. Anyway, I also want to remind you that under no circumstances should you be in the room with volunteers between 6 p.m. and 8 a.m., no matter what. But why? Eric continued. I know this is difficult, but just know everything we do is for the safety of our staff and volunteers. Anything you need to know, you will be told. Now, let's all get back to work. There was no time given for questions, of course. I pulled the blood pressure cuff tighter and tried again. Nothing. Machine's broken, I said to Molly, an older lady who's working in room 301 with me. I need to get another. She nodded, but she wasn't really listening. She was pressing the buttons of the EKG machine furiously and frowning. She moved her hand to the man's chest again to count the intercostal spaces between his ribs. She sighed, frustrated. The second blood pressure machine didn't work either. Sorry about this, sir. Seems I'm having some technical problems, I said. The man moved his hands from over his eyes and then thought better of it, squinting in pain, and put them back. We were working in almost darkness. Hey, what was... His mouth was bleeding. I moved his arm again, and sure enough, there was a small pool of blood in his mouth. I hit the emergency alarm. Several staff members rushed in. He's bleeding from the mouth, I said to the doctor, moving out of the way. He pushed his way through, less urgently than I would have liked, and looked closely. It's his lip. He's bitten his lip, he said. He wiped the blood away, and sure enough, I saw a small cut at the bottom of his lip. It was bleeding a lot, but it was only coming from his lip. Everyone turned to walk out again. I blushed. Sorry, No, it's fine, the doctor said more gently than I heard him speak before. You did the right thing, checking it. Everything is okay. While you're here, I'm struggling to take this man's blood pressure. I think there's something wrong with the machines, I said to him. And the EKG machine, too, said Molly. Her face was bright red through either embarrassment or frustration. Don't you ladies worry. I'll take care of it all from here. They are a bit behind in some tests in 203. Why don't you go and give them a hand? It really wasn't a question. We both walked out, defeated, and didn't say a word to each other as we went down the stairs. That evening, I waited for my opportunity. At 6 p.m., the door was locked and everyone left, either to go home or finish their shifts elsewhere. A couple of the studies had finished, and it would be a couple days before we got more in, so there weren't many staff members in the building. At 6:03, I tiptoed into the room, unlocked the door, and slipped inside. I reached to flip on the lights, but nothing happened. My eyes adjusted to the darkness the best they could, but I could barely see a couple feet in front of me. As I walked around the room, I realized the beds were empty. Every single one of them. As I took another step, I slipped on something and had to grab the edge of the bed to steady myself. I felt a whoosh of air from behind me, followed by a searing, hot, white pain in the back of my neck, making me fall to my knees. I let out a scream. The door opened again, and in the door was Eric. He ran in, grabbed my arm, and pulled me out before slamming the door closed and locking it behind him. He hurried me into one of the unused rooms and sat me on the floor. What the fuck, Sally? What happened to you in there? I couldn't answer. I felt sick. He moved my hair, and his eyes widened. I woke up in a bed I don't recognize, and sounds of clattering below me. I tried to shout out, but couldn't. Soon the door opened, and Eric walked in and handed me a plate of sausage and eggs. Eat that, he said. You lost blood. I stitched you up and cleaned it. Hopefully it won't get infected. You stitched me up? I said. I felt to the back of my neck and felt a thick dressing. Yeah, used to be my doctor. Well, kinda. I didn't finish all my training, but, I could do a few stitches. Sally, what happened? So I told him everything. And he told me everything too. He'd been increasingly suspicious of room 301. A volunteer had whispered to him, asking him please to help him escape. He just wanted to go home and they wouldn't let him, so he went to Harry, who told him the volunteer was clearly confused. They were free to leave at any time. They just needed to sign a paper, and they wouldn't get their full compensation. They also needed a doctor to take a look at him. Well, the next day, Eric was gone, but the man was gone, but Eric couldn't find any of the discharge forms for him. When he checked files, the man's name was gone, as though he had never been part of the study at all. Then, of course, there was the fact that none of the vital signs could be read or were very low. But someone was going back and changing what Eric was putting into the files to make them seem normal. Then, as he was just about to leave work, he had heard a scream and went in and found me in the room. I was covered in blood and had a large gash on the back of my neck. He brought me into one of the empty rooms to stitch me up and cleaned up all the blood from the floor himself. Something really bad is going on, Sally. Alice wasn't just a coworker, was she? He shook his head. We couldn't tell anyone. A 15-year age difference. They would have thought I was a predator of some kind, but it wasn't like that. We loved each other, and she was happy. She didn't kill herself, Sally. I know she didn't. She told me everything. She didn't have a very good childhood, but she was finally happy. What are we gonna do? I said. We need to find out what's going on in that room. My boyfriend was frantic. 32 missed calls. Babe, I'm sorry I didn't come home last night. I had an accident at work. I fell, and I cut myself. I didn't know why I was lying. This was my boyfriend, after all. Maybe I was just too tired or too scared to tell the whole story again. Maybe I was worried he'd think I was insane, but something kept me from telling him. Sally, I've been so worried. I'm so glad to hear your voice. Are you okay now? Which hospital are you? I'll come right away. I'm not at a hospital. I'm at Eric's. Silence. What do you mean you're at Eric's? He said eventually. He used to be a doctor. He helped treat my wound. What, and he took you home with him? It was late. I wasn't with it, so I couldn't tell him where I lived. Wouldn't a hospital have been more appropriate? Or anywhere? Maybe it's nothing like that. It's not what you think. It's just a friend. He took care of me. I'll be home tonight. Wait, tonight? I mean, you're going to work? Yeah, I'm fine now. I can go in. And you're just going to walk the shame into work in yesterday's clothes. No. His girlfriend, ex-girlfriend, late girlfriend, she had some work clothes here. He says I can wear those. Right. And I guess I'll see you tonight then. And he hung up. Eric grimaced sympathetically at me. I shook it out of my head. There would be time to deal with that. I could make it right again. But for now, I needed to find out what the hell happened to me. You're both fired, Harry said as we walked in. What? You heard me. You were both in room 301 last night despite explicitly being forbidden. Get out. Go on. What do you mean, we're fired? How do you even know? Security cameras. Now leave, or security will be called to escort you out. If there are security cameras, you must have seen what happened in there last night. What I know is both of you entered the room. So if we wanted to go and say, report we were unjustly fired, you would have evidence of our wrongdoing, right? So, if necessary, you would show that video of what happened. The video is confidential. I don't need to prove anything. You're fired, and that's that. Well, I'm not sure it is. You see, Sally suffered an injury last night. I mean, if you want to get in a legal battle over this, that's fine, if you want all these details to come out. They stared at each other. I don't think there's any need for anything like that, Harry finally said. You will be suspended with pay for 4 days, then you can return to work. No, Eric said. In 4 days, they leave. What do you mean? You know what I mean. Room 301, the study is over in 4 days. Fine. Take your schedules, get to work. Eric had won, but he wasn't content. Well, you see, I'm not sure we want to work in room 203 today. I think we want a room in room 301, don't we, Sally? I nodded. Fine. You'll swap with Molly and Joe, but you need to be out by 6 p.m. I told you it's a matter of safety. You didn't mean the safety of the volunteers, did you? I said, my hand moving to my neck. He shook his head and walked off. As we walked into the room, I was suddenly aware there were a lot fewer volunteers than there had been when they started. There were only 5 of them left. 4 of them were completely still, their hands covering their eyes, but Victor looked positively chirpy. Good morning, he said as we walked into the room. I smiled at him. What happened to the others? I asked. There were 12 of you before. Couldn't handle it, I guess. Decided to go home. Probably that porridge that did it. He laughed. I rolled the EKG machine over and opened up the file. Then noticed the instructions had changed. No longer were you supposed to check vital signs or take blood samples, and instead there were directions for various tests I had never administered before, like reaction time. While Victor was the quickest, the others performed better than any 21-year-olds could have done. The other thing was that at no point in the day were we given meals to bring to them. They didn't eat once. Yet they looked stronger and fitter than they had when they arrived. Halfway through one of the tests, Victor said to me, "Will you come visit us tonight again?" I exchanged looks with Eric. Where were you? All the beds were empty. Oh, you know, we're stuck in bed all day. You can't blame us for wanting to get up and out. Without warning, Eric ran over to the man. His hands tightened around his neck. What happened to Alice? Eric, stop! I shouted, running over to get him off. But the man peeled Eric's hands off him easily and laughed at him. She was your girlfriend, wasn't she? She was a sweet little thing. She visited us too, naughty girl. We know you're not supposed to. Don't worry. We won't tell anyone. Merrick looked like he might murder him, but I grabbed his arm and squeezed his hand, and he managed to keep himself together. The day passed excruciatingly slowly, and it became clear that working in this room would not get us answers, other than the fact that these 60-year-old men were in the best shape of their lives. Eric tried to ask Victor questions, but it was clear it was all a joke to him. When Eric mentioned my accident last night, he said I should be careful where I step so I don't fall over. When Eric asked what Alice did when she came to visit, he just repeated that she was a naughty girl for coming to visit, and he hoped I would visit tonight too. We knew we had little chance of getting in just after 6 p.m. again, so we pretended to leave and drove around in Eric's car until 8 p.m. when we knew Harry was finishing work. When we went back in, we only saw one other member of staff, a cleaner who ignored us. We opened the door to 301, shining the flashlight into the dark room. The beds were empty again, but I felt like we weren't alone. We walked around the room slowly and quietly. Fuck! Eric shouted eventually. He was shining the flashlight up onto the ceiling. Two of the men were on the ceiling. Their bodies were contorted in strange ways. Their limbs splayed flat on the ceiling at odd angles, and they were looking down at us. Eric moved the flashlight to see their face. They moved their hands up to cover their eyes once again, but they stayed there, stuck to the ceiling. "You came," said a voice behind us. It was Victor, except he wasn't quite a man anymore. Elongated, black fingers rested on my shoulders, and his nails were long like talons. They dug into me, and I yelped as they found skin. He breathed in deeply. "Get the fuck off her!" Eric shouted, baseball bat in hand. Victor turned to look at Eric as though seeing him for the first time, and in that next seconds, several things happened at the same time. He grabbed a hold of Eric, spun him around, sinking his teeth into his neck and ripping into his flesh. The men from the ceiling jumped down to join him, snapping and fighting for pieces of Eric, and almost instantly he dropped to the ground. And then Victor looked up. "I'm so glad you came back. Sally, isn't it? I couldn't stop thinking about you." He was walking towards me. The other men were still eating Eric. I instinctively moved the flashlight to shine it directly into his face, and he stepped back in surprise. I picked up the baseball bat and swung it at him as hard as I could. His head snapped back. I didn't look back before I ran out of the room, locking the door behind me, locking those monsters away, locking Eric in with them. I knew I couldn't do anything for him, but my heart ached as I did it. I've come here to warn you. I have to warn you now before it's too late. You see, I called the police as soon as I got home. I told them everything. But the research facility I work for is saying the trial ended 2 days ago. They have the files. They had the files showing the drug trial for a new cancer treatment. They have the files showing how there were some side effects like shortness of breath, low blood pressure, and sensitivity to light. They have the files showing that these side effects were minimal, just short-lasting. They have records of every test performed, and none of it is real. And I got the call that Eric had killed himself. Apparently, after Alice, his girlfriend, died, he couldn't cope without her. He killed himself, too. I work in a drug testing facility, and I think the volunteers from room 301 have escaped. Dun, dun, dun. What was it? Did they turn into some creature? Kind of sounds almost like a vampire. Sort of, kind of, not really, maybe. I don't know. What do you think? Well, I think we're going to call it an end to the night. We've had a nice time together. I hope those shivers up your spine feel so pleasurable. Well, at least for me they are. Now, if you happened to miss out on the stream or part of the stream, or you have friends who would like to listen, or family, let them know. I leave these streams up for you to listen, to shudder to enjoy that shiver up the spine, the blood going cold in your veins, And I have the perfect medication for you. Even more horror. Now, we will see each other soon, my children, as I will be back to add more to your prescriptions. And maybe add a few more authors or stories, or I don't know. We'll have to see what the day holds. But I hope you have enjoyed your time with me. I certainly enjoyed mine. If you enjoyed these stories, please be sure to pass on the message to these authors. If they happen to respond, maybe. Anyway, I know I did not quite get to one of my authors this evening, and I do apologize. Saturday, I will be reading from this author. The author is Horror Queen 1212, and I unfortunately have run out of time this evening, as visiting hours, well, they're now over. I think it's time to send the visitors away, and time to put the patients back to bed. I hope you had a wonderful evening with us. Maybe you will return. Hey, maybe you'll volunteer to join us. Or maybe you just might get brought here. You never can tell. Either way, we will return for visiting hours come Saturday. Hours will be 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern. This evening I did postpone an hour out of consideration for a couple of my fellow friends in the asylum. Either way, I hope to see you soon. Enjoy your evening, and I shall see you again.